Hi everyone, welcome to Coin Bundle Conversations in partnership with Tuesday Capital, where we invite some of the leading investors and entrepreneurs in the blockchain space to tell you about their stories so that you can invest in the right projects and at the right time. So today I'm really excited to have my friend Naveed join us, who's the co-founder and CEO of Flourish. Flourish helps people build lasting habits in a scientific way. And Naveed, through his experience, has been a coach to some major investors as well as entrepreneurs in the blockchain space. So Naveed, welcome. Great to have you.
Glad to be here.
Great. So Naveed, just to start with, I knew you when you were a consultant at Dahlberg, working in a lot of countries around the world, helping people in emerging markets improve their healthcare and education. Tell me about your journey as an entrepreneur. How did you decide to move from Dahlberg to Divita to starting your own company?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Well, I've always had a passion for trying to use my career in a way to make as much social impact as possible and basically help those around me. And that's what originally led me to working international development. But for a variety of reasons, I ended up deciding to focus on the domestic market in US and healthcare. And spending some time at Divita, I really got to learn the way the healthcare industry works from the inside out. And what my biggest takeaway was from that experience was that at the core of the issue in American healthcare is the fact that we don't know how to build and form lasting habits. And that is essentially the reason why people struggle from obesity, diabetes, hypertension, all of the major chronic illnesses that account for 86% of US healthcare spend are predicated on the fact that we don't know how to form and build lasting habits.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. So then you realize this problem. It's contributing to 86% of healthcare spend. It's causing people a lot of anxiety. How did you decide personally to take this leap onto entrepreneurship?
Sure. Well, my personal experience with regards to habits actually goes back 20 years, right? So I've struggled with depression actually since I was about 15, and it was undiagnosed for almost 20 years, or about 10 years, sorry. And and through that process of having depression, so many of my own routines and habits formed in a way that were just really unhealthy. Most notably sleep. Yeah. It's funny because when I was working at Dahlberg, I did have the opportunity to go travel around the world and work with very senior officials in various developing countries. But I also couldn't get out of bed in the morning because I was struggling with being sleep deprived, being jet lagged, or just having a flare up of my depression. And so I'm sitting here in Ethiopia hitting snooze every morning for 90 minutes while I'm late to my meeting with the Minister of Agriculture. So it was something that really plagued me throughout my professional career. And I finally decided a few years ago that this has got to stop. It's bad for my career. It's bad for me professionally. It's also just terrible for my health. It's a terrible way to start the morning to feel so much shame. Why the fuck can I not get out of bed when everybody else in the world can? And so that really prompted me to dive deep and try to understand, okay, what do we know about habits? How do they really form? What's the latest psychology, neuroscience, behavioral economics tell us about or tell me specifically about what I can do to change this pattern that I've been playing out for every day, every morning for the last 10 years. And I came across some really fascinating research that was done out of Stanford by a guy named BJ Fogg. What was really fascinating about that was that when I looked at the model of my particular behavior in the morning, it just fit. It fit perfectly well. And this was after months of research, of digging into all the academic research out there, most of which was pretty uncompelling. I mean, I tried everything. I tried, different, meditation techniques. I tried and I bought a device that would shock me.
To wake you up.
Yeah, to wake me up, or to do other activities or whatnot. Different types of alarm clocks. I mean, you name it. I'd kind of tried it all. And this research that was out of Stanford by B.J. Fogg was by far the most compelling. And what I was able to do using that research was look at my pattern, which was basically every morning I would wake up, my alarm would go off, I'd be like, fuck, like. It's just, it's loud. Yeah. It's across the room because I put it across the room because I wanted to have like some work to do to have to get up in the morning. And then eventually be like, all right, fine. And so I'd like throw the covers off, run over to my phone, hit snooze, and be like, like peace. Okay, great. But now I'm cold. And so then I'd run back to bed, jump into bed, toss the covers back on, and be like, quiet, peace, warmth. And then I'd doze off, and then 9 minutes later I do the whole thing right over again.
I think many people can relate to this. So how did you fix it?
Yeah. So what was really fascinating was that using this model, I started by trying to do something really just very simple. I said, okay, I'm going to take a glass of water and I'm going to put it next to my phone, and my aim is to embed a routine where I just take a drink of water every morning after I hit snooze. I was still allowed to go back to bed. Yeah. That was the deal I made with myself. And originally, my intention was that this glass of water routine would be kind of like breadcrumbs. I was going to move the glass of water from next to my phone to like the doorway to down the hall, so that it was like basically so close to the bathroom that there'd be no option not to do that. But what ended up happening was really fascinating. Using the techniques that come out of B.J. Fogg's research, I was able to embed this drinking water routine within about a week. Okay, and then within about a week later than that, I just stopped hitting snooze.
Interesting.
I just stopped hitting snooze altogether. And at first I didn't quite understand what would happen, but when I dug into the research a bit more, what I realized was I essentially kind of overloaded the circuit. Like I had this cycle that I'd been playing out for years and years and years, and by just simply adding one additional step to that cycle, it couldn't hold the weight of basically drinking this water, and it kind of created this wedge that broke the chain that I'd been kind of like shackled to for 10 years of my life. And this was life-changing for me, because to now all of a sudden be able to get up with my alarm meant I had an extra hour and a half in the morning, meant all of my other routines kind of just fell into place. I now had time for a regular exercise routine. I ate breakfast every morning. I could be at work at 8 a.m. reliably, which meant that at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock the night before, I wasn't afraid that I wasn't getting my work done, and I could go home. And also just like the shame. There was so much shame that was associated with this routine that was embedded for so long, and I was able to just kind of break all that out. And once that happened, I was like, wow, this is really fascinating. I wonder if this will work on other people. I tried it on 10 friends. We did all different types of routines, worked well enough for them. Then we started charging for it, and kind of a business was born from there.
That's amazing. So it seems like you helped identify a seed and fix that seed and planted that seed that then had ripple effects across the rest of your life, and that's the basis for Flourish.
That's exactly right.
So what are some of the other habits that people form using your help and with Flourish?
Sure. There's about 3 categories that we typically find that people are interested in. One category is around health and wellness. A second is around productivity, and then the third is around learning a new skill. So health and wellness are kind of the things that you might imagine: sleep, exercise related habits, eating less sugar, meditation is very popular. The productivity ones, a really common one is planning and strategic thinking, carving out time in the morning for that. And then in terms of learning a new skill, things like learning a foreign language, practicing the guitar, These are all things that people have used the system for. And then I think the one that is maybe particularly interesting to your listeners are that is just the idea of a morning routine, right? I mean, Tim Ferriss talks about this all the time. The idea of having like just a stack of activities that you do in the morning that kind of gets you off to be the most productive that day. And so we're able to kind of combine a combination of health and wellness and productivity, put them together into a morning routine, and that's one of our most popular services that we offer.
That's awesome. And so Naveed, I know that like some of your most prominent clients that you coach with these routines are prominent cryptocurrency investors. And so because a lot of the people who are seeing this are people who are just breaking into cryptocurrencies and just starting to invest, what are some of the habits that you've seen these professional cryptocurrencies investors work with that you think our audience can benefit from as well?
Sure. Well, I think what's fascinating as I look at a lot of the folks that I work with that are involved in crypto is that there's basically three themes that come across my work that I think are really unique to the crypto environment, right? So one has to do with being extremely intentional with your time, right? And being very strategic with how you spend your time. A second has to do with emotional management. You can imagine, I mean, the crypto markets fluctuate very wildly, and obviously, when your net worth is changing, day to day by 40%, 60%, that's pretty emotional experience. And then the third is just the fact that crypto is a highly international, global phenomenon, right? Which means that there's a lot of travel that's involved with folks that are very involved in the space. And how do you and so one of the challenges that the folks really face is how do they maintain peak performance while on the road when you don't have kind of a controlled environment and context to root your routines in. So those are some of the key challenges and themes that are coming across very commonly with folks that I'm working with.
That's awesome. And as a crypto investor myself, I can relate to all three of those. And I'm sure many of the people in the audience can relate to that as well. So I think it would be great to dive into each of those. So let's talk about the first one. You mentioned intentionality. There's a lot of information in the market. We are constantly being overloaded. What does the science say about how to deal with that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think an example here is probably can really help illustrate this point. So one of my current clients is a person named Guy Marita. He's a member of the kind of investor contingent named Block Sauce, and so they're very common in terms of advising and identifying different projects to invest in. And he came to me because there's so much information out there, right? There's 2,000 coins out there. There's a Reddit for each one. There's various different subreddits for themes, etc. All the stuff that's happening in Twitter. I mean, the information is moving so quickly, and he just was struggling. While putting a lot of time in, was struggling to be able to really stay focused on the most important activities each day to ensure that he was extracting the insights from all that information to be able to be as knowledgeable and as effective in his investor meetings. And so one of the things that we worked together was to really establish a very regular planning routine, right, each morning around how he's going to spend his time. There's a couple things there's a couple things I want to bring up here. So one is on the science side, which is how do you actually do that? Like, what are the levers that you can pull to be really effective when establishing a new habit? And most people, when they think about habits, they oftentimes think about the role of motivation, right? Like, do I have enough willpower? What are my goals? Is there a financial reward? Right? All of those things that get people to try to execute a given behavior. But there's actually two other levers that one can pull that are just as effective, if not more so, and far, far more easier to implement. And those levers are, what we call effort or ability and trigger, right, and prompt. And so as an example here with regards to prompt and the situation with Guy, what he wanted to do was establish, was to figure out, well, when exactly was he going to do the planning routine each morning, right? And so we took a very detailed catalog of his morning to understand, like, basically how that morning went, and we tried to identify, well, what pieces existed in his morning, regardless of where he was, whether he was in New York or San Francisco or Taipei or Berlin. And one of the things that came up was the fact that he, would always have a moment. He would always have a moment where he would sit down in front of his computer, right, in the morning. That was something that existed every single time. He would specifically sit in a chair, right? That would happen every single time. And the moment of, like, actually flipping open the laptop, right? So, that's something that people can probably, like, relate to very well, right? That's a really common thing. And so we anchored to that existing routine, right? We anchored to this thing that happened everywhere he's at, the existing routine, the fact that, okay, that's gonna be the prompt to him to remember that now he's gonna sit down and spend, less than 30 seconds doing a short planning activity. And then the key thing there is, like, while it's one thing to try to use this prompt piece, but at the end of the day, emotions are what create habits.
Right.
And it's not just so we wanted to pair this prompt with also what we call a celebration. So that he gets kind of an emotional reward after doing this. And that's what really wires in a habit, makes it feel really automatic, so that it's something that he's gonna do every single day, regardless of if he remembers or not.
Right. And I think that's got some real application to first-time investors, because if they treat their investing exercise as something that's organized, habitual, done on a particular time of the day, that saves them from a lot of distress of making rash, impulsive decisions, which is when most people lose money.
Yeah, so Paul Graham talks about this in The Intelligent Investor, the importance of being very disciplined, very methodical in your approach, and because at the end of the day, we are human, we do have emotions, and we are susceptible to being driven by those emotions. So I mean, that kind of segues very nicely into the second theme that we talked about, which is emotional management.
Yeah, and particularly in the cryptocurrency investment world, that is really key, because as you said yourself, there's huge swings in the market, and especially for first-time investors who haven't seen this before, it's a lot to manage emotionally, both from a personal well-being point of view, but also from an intelligent investing point of view. So how do people manage their emotions? How do people deal with this volatility in a way which helps them stay in control?
Sure, absolutely. Well, there's a lot of science out there that talks about these things. I mean, one of the big themes right now, in 2018, is the use of mindfulness and meditation to do this. And that's one technique that is actually effective, is to have a regular meditation routine. Okay. But another one, which I think sometimes gets lost in is it's a bit older school and gets lost sometimes in the media these days, is just the use of exercise. To be honest, right? Going for a run. Lifting weights, etc., can have really positive impact on your emotional health, and keep you in a place that you're very kind of resilient to the volatility that is just intrinsic in crypto investing.
Yeah, and that's great. One of our investors, Justin Kahn, who started Twitch, he has this quote that fitness is the first step to greatness, which I think is another way of saying what you're saying, which is you have to train your mind and your body to be ready to make the right investment and make the right decisions.
Absolutely. I mean, it's about optimizing your whole being. Yeah. Absolutely.
Great. And then the third theme, so many of our viewers actually come from 70 plus countries around the world. And you mentioned the global nature of crypto, which is both an opportunity, but also potentially stressful.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the third theme as well.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. This is probably the one that it makes, from a habit formation standpoint, makes folks that are involved in crypto, it makes it the most challenging. Because I think what a lot of people don't realize is that when a given behavior occurs, it's actually very dependent on the context, right? So that could mean everything from whether or not you're in your room to like what the time zone is to how like what the weather is like that day. All of those things have subtle effects on the likeliness of you to perform a given behavior.
Right.
And so when one is traveling and you're not in your kind of regular environment, it'll make a routine that you might have really embedded in your life at home. It'll make it something that is a real struggle to carry with you. And so the key thing to do there is again come back to try to basically stack habits, right, what I call stacking habits. So this is to try to figure out those routines that do travel with you. Yeah. And then use that as the prompt, use that exact routine as the prompt for identifying or for cueing you to perform the next routine, right? So, there are certain things that people do everywhere they go, right? Yeah. They're always going to brush their teeth. They're always going to have a shower. They're probably going to use the bathroom in some way. There's, or alternately, there's a routine that where every time you enter your hotel room, right? The first time you enter the hotel room is like a very specific thing that happens when you're on the road. Yeah. You can use that as a way to say, okay, this is the place where that's going to prompt me to remind myself that this is the place where I'm going to do my meditation. And now that I've picked my location for that meditation routine, then the next time that I wake up in the morning, it'll kind of fit nicely into my day. Awesome. So that's certainly, I think that's certainly the thing that makes that makes keeping yourself on applying these techniques to be in as peak performance as possible, some of the most challenging. But I think the science in that ways makes it an opportunity because if you're able to apply these techniques, you're going to have a differential advantage over people that you're kind of competing with from an investment standpoint.
Awesome. That's some really helpful advice. So intentionality, emotional control, and geographic flexibility, some great advice on countering all of those. So now switching gears a little bit, Naveed, a lot of the people who've come here and advised our viewers have also talked about the importance of evaluating a team behind a project before putting their money behind a particular token or a particular bundle of tokens. And you coach CEOs and entrepreneurs, both in this space and outside. What are some of the things that you've seen are traits of successful entrepreneurs, and how can our viewers kind of look out for them when they're evaluating investments?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I think one of the pieces that I typically look for that I've seen is really effective with people either in the entrepreneurial space or otherwise is the ability to be whole-brained. And so what I mean by that is this combination of being both having very high IQ but also EQ. And I think the IQ piece, people are generally feel like that's pretty commonplace, right? The importance of somebody having high horsepower, sure, that'll be important, right? The EQ piece, though, I think it oftentimes gets underrated, and a classic example here is just outside of even the entrepreneurial world is the sporting world, right? In terms of you look at like someone like Steph Curry. I mean, people talk about he's a great 3-point shooter, but what he'll describe is the reason that he's so effective, and this is what a lot of like scientists have looked at as well, is that his ability to forget the fact that he's missed a shot, right, allows him to be able to approach that next shot with a clear mind and the belief that he'll be able to make it. And so it's actually that resilience piece, right? So his ability to manage his emotions, is what makes him truly spectacular as a performer in basketball.
Yeah, so that's a really fantastic point, because the great thing about this space is our viewers who are investors can actually now go on Twitter and go on Telegram and go on Reddit and directly interact with the founders and the team behind a project. And there's certain projects where, for example, the founders are really smart and are working really well, but they have low EQ and they're being rude to the investors and they're rude to kind of like the people backing them. And that's something which people can watch out for and evaluate people on the basis of.
Sure. And I think, certainly things like how an individual will relate with another individual, right, is an indicator for EQ. But I think the pieces that I'm most excited about looking at are folks that have concepts around resilience and grit, right? So grit being this ability to truly persevere in the face of adversity. Folks that have a history of doing like endurance sports, for instance, I think often have outsized grit. One of our mutual friends, Jeff Calkins, right? He. This is something that strikes me oftentimes, is just his ability to continue to keep his head down and just work extremely hard despite what's going kind of on around him. I think that's something that definitely shines, especially in a space like this.
Yeah, and those are things which you guys can actually evaluate, both by looking at the backgrounds of the teams, but also by talking and directly interacting with people. And it's really important for you to look at that as well, not just the project and what people are building, but the grit of the team behind it. That's awesome. Now, what are other advice that you would give to someone who's investing for the first time or investing in crypto for the first time?
Sure, absolutely. Investing is something that kind of is really near and dear to my heart, and I spent a lot of time looking at this both, in the traditional markets as well as in the crypto markets. And I think, especially as an individual investor, I think what is the most important thing that one can do is to understand one's own strengths and weaknesses, and more importantly, how we can reframe weaknesses as, in fact, a strength. So, for example, as an individual investor, right, I might think to myself, oh man, it's going to be really hard for me to trade on kind of a high frequency basis. I don't necessarily have all the technology at my disposal that some of the larger shops are going to. I seem like I'm just at such a disadvantage, right, in that case. And while that might be true, the fact that larger shops have larger check sizes, right, that they need to deploy, they have larger amounts of capital they need to deploy, which means that there's a whole class of coins that they're not even going to look at because they're just not going to be able to absorb the amount of capital that is like a minimum threshold for a larger shop, right? So, I'm less interested these days in looking at, coins 1 through 10 when I'm thinking about finding contrarian opportunities. Now, granted, you might invest in Ether or Bitcoin just from a just to have exposure to the market more generally. But if you're really looking for opportunities that you think are going to give you outsized returns, then I'm far more interested in looking at kind of coins 20 through 50 that are still not that still have a lower risk profile than coin 2000, but would be able to absorb the kind of capital size that makes sense for me specifically.
No, that's really helpful advice, and that's one of the things which we are trying to facilitate at Coin Bundle as well, where we are trying to both vet the lower market cap coins, but also organize them into themes, so that if, for example, someone says, I want to invest in all of the coins that are environmentally friendly, we'll vet them and bundle them together so that people can buy them with one click. Or interestingly, we've gotten a lot of demand for halal coins, which is all the cryptocurrencies that are declared legal by Islamic finance, and we'll be bundling them together, which both of us being from Pakistan, you can relate to as well.
Absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so I think, I think some of the tools that you're describing, those seem like no-brainers when it comes to what would be effective or useful to kind of the individual investor. I'm really excited to also think about, you also want to think about the fact that, like, from a timing standpoint, right, you have a limited amount of time. So when you're looking at concentration, really you're not going to be the kind of the person that you're going to invest in 20, 30, 40 coins, right? You want to be able to pick maybe 7 coins total that you're going to invest in, that's going to give you kind of a diversification across the portfolio, and believe that those coins are going to be ones that you can make a bet and hold on to for a somewhat lengthy amount of time, because you're just not going to have the time to be constantly doing the diligence, the vetting, and then actually choosing the right time to make the trade. That's a pretty significant investment on a per coin basis.
Yeah,
want to minimize that.
That's really powerful advice too, because I think a lot of people lose money by trying to compete with people whose full-time jobs it is to like trade and find and do daily trades, whereas in a lot of cases finding long-term investment opportunities and buying and holding the way Warren Buffett does it is better if you don't have that much time to evaluate everything.
Exactly. That's as an individual investor, that's the way that I would think about it. Absolutely.
Great. So Naveed, what's next for Flourish? What's coming up in the next 6 months? Are there any announcements that you'd like to make?
Well, we've just launched our kind of flagship project right now, which was the kind of the Flourish program. We we help you build lasting habits in 10 weeks using one-on-one coaching. We've had incredible results thus far. We grew over the past couple months about 40% a week, every single week, to the extent that we kind of hit capacity, and we actually had to unfortunately take a pause on being able to deliver the service. But in the next couple weeks, we'll be able to kind of relaunch and put ourselves in a position to just kind of help more people establish those habits that are going to make them flourish in life.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Naveed, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day to join us. We really appreciate it, and thanks again for your advice as well.
Absolutely, Saad. It was great to be here.